Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Live Through Jesus podcast with Courtney Gilmore. On this episode, Promises and Prayers. This is Joshua 9.
Quickly before we get started, if you're new to Live Through Jesus, make sure you go to livethroughjesus.com and sign up to receive your free 5-week Bible study over Abraham. There you'll also find blog posts that coincide with the teachings on this podcast and social media links, which is another way to keep in touch throughout the week. Okay, let's get started.
When you have a decision to make, what is the very first thing that you do? Do you start looking at all of the evidence, gather all the data, get all the facts, make you a little list? Do you talk to friends, or do you go to God first? We can definitely do all of those things, but do you think to go to God first? Our lesson today will show you what it looks like when you don't do that. When we forget to go to God and we just make a decision that looks right to us. So, we've been going through the book of Joshua, and in Joshua, the Israelites are in the promised land and they're fighting for it. And they've won 2 battles at this point. And so the people in that area are starting to notice, and they're starting to realize, hey, they're having success when they come against these cities individually. And so maybe it would be better for us if we would fight them collectively. So all of the people gathered together and decided, yes, we're going to fight them collectively. Everyone thought this was a good idea, except for the Hivites that lived in Gibeon and the surrounding area. They thought it would be much better if they would just join with the Israelites. They did not feel that they had a chance, even collectively, because I think they could see God's work. And they knew that they had no power against God. And the reason I think that is because this passage tells us that they know about the promise that God gave to Abraham and his descendants. They're aware that God told Moses to go in and take the land and that he would give them victory there. And also that God told them to kill all of the people living there. They know about this promise somehow. So they don't think that they have a chance, and they want to make a peace treaty with them. But since they're aware that God told them to kill everyone that lived in the land, they know that if they come to them and say, hey, we live just a few miles northwest of Jerusalem, and we'd like to make a peace treaty with you, the people are going to say, no, we can't do that. God told us that that was not allowed. And so they devised this plan to look as if they have come from very far away. So they put on old worn out clothes and old worn out shoes, and they get wineskins that have busted and been mended. And then they grab old worn out sacks and they put dry crumbled bread inside. And they travel to the Israelites. And this is verse 6. It says, they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, and they said to him, we have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel were initially skeptical of this. And so they said, perhaps you live among us. How could we make a covenant with you if that was the case? And so they asked him, who are you and where do you come from? And they don't answer this question, because if they were to say, we are the Hivites who have come from Gibeon, then they would know they're not supposed to make a treaty with these people. In Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 5, it says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and he's cast out many nations before you, the Hivites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations that are greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, or take their daughter for your son, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you, and he will destroy you suddenly. But this is how you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars and break down their sacred pillars and cut down their wooden images and burn their carved images with fire. And so this is what they were supposed to do to the Hivites. And so if they would have said, we are the Hivites who live northwest of Jerusalem, then they would have said, yeah, sorry, this is what we have to do to you. And so they don't answer the question. They don't tell them who they are. They just say, we're from a very far away country. And we've come to you because of the name of the Lord your God. We heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt and all that he did to the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and to Og, the king of Bashan. And so our elders and all of the inhabitants of our country said, take provisions in your hand and go on a journey to meet with them and say to them, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. So they explained just that they were from a faraway country, and they told them why they had come. Then they said, look, do you see this bread? It was fresh when we left our home, but now it's all dry and crumbly, and our sacks are all worn out. And look at us. We've been traveling a long ways. This is why we look like this. And that's all it took. That's all it took for the Israelites to believe them. As soon as they saw all this, it says in verse 14 that they took some of their provisions, meaning they took some of this bread and they examined it. And it says, but they did not ask counsel from the Lord. So they took these provisions, and everything that the people said to them looked to be true. And so they just said, all right, sounds good to us. We'll make a treaty with you. That's all it took. But only 3 days later, they realized, oh, these people live here. They lied to us. And they go out and check out Gibeon and then the 3 small towns around Gibeon. And they realize we made a treaty with all of these people and they live right here. And even though they approach the people, they don't attack them. And so the Israelite people are mad at their elders and they say, why are you not attacking them? We're supposed to do that. And also, what did you make a treaty with them in the first place for? And so they said, yeah, we shouldn't have made a treaty with them, but we did. We fell for their trick and we can't really do anything about that right now. And we're not attacking them because we made an oath to them in the name of God. And so if we break this oath, then it looks like God also broke the oath. So not only are we liars, but we're making God out to be a liar in this new land. And we can't do that. And so the only idea that we have is to just make them our slaves. We can't let them live in the land because God told us, if we let them live in the land, then they worship other gods and they'll persuade you to worship other gods. And so they have to be under our rule instead of their own rule, but we can't kill them. And so this is the only idea that we have. So they approached the Hivites and they said, why did you lie to us? You came to us, you told us you didn't live here, and obviously you do. And this is verse 24. They said, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all of the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. And so we fear greatly for our lives because of you. And that's why we did this thing. Now behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it. And so that day they took the Hivites as their servants. And then later, whenever they divide the land out, this land goes to the tribe of Benjamin, and they designate Gibeon as a Levitical city within the territory of Benjamin. And in the Levitical cities is where the sanctuaries were, where the people would go and make their sacrifices. And so they made the Gibeonites the servants of the house of God. They could not be the servants of the people because, number one, the people had sinned, and so they shouldn't profit off of this sin. And then number two, if they were to benefit by taking people as their servants, then that would tempt them to continue to do this. Oh, we don't have enough servants, so we're not going to kill these people. Instead, we're just going to take you as our servants. And God forbid them to do that. And so they couldn't benefit personally. They couldn't be their personal servants. And God is the only one that hasn't done anything wrong in this scenario. And so his house is what benefits from this. His house gets to benefit from the sin of the Hivites and from the sin of the Israelites for not asking him. And so the Hivites became servants of the house of God, and it says they became cutters of wood and carriers of water. And this would be a very big job, right, for the people in the sanctuary because they needed lots of wood for their sacrifices, and they also needed a lot of water for their cleansing rituals. And so this kept the Hivites busy and helped God and his servants and did not benefit any of the guilty parties. And so this is the predicament that the Israelites found themselves in that day because they didn't ask God first. Since they didn't do that, and since they made an oath in his name, they couldn't break it. And so now they're between a rock and a hard place, right? And when I read this story, I just thought, wow, they take these oaths very seriously. And we should always take our promises seriously. If we say we're going to do something, we should do it. That is a given. But there were two things about this that made it very, very important that they kept their promise. One is it wasn't just a commitment that they made. It wasn't just something where they said, sure, we'll come to your house tomorrow. And then they called you later and said, hey, something came up. I wasn't able to come. That's a little bit different than making a covenant with someone, making a peace treaty, an oath with them. This is like a contract for us today. If I get a loan for my house, each person is making a promise. And my promise is dependent on the bank's promise, and the bank's promise is dependent on my promise. If either one of us doesn't fulfill our promise, then it messes everything up. And I would have never made the promise to pay this money back if I would have realized that they weren't going to give it all to me, right? And they would have never given me all this money if they didn't think that I was going to pay it back. And so we sign a contract saying that each of us will fulfill our end of the bargain. And then there's usually provisions in there that say, now, if I don't, then you can take my house, right? In Genesis 15, we see an example of how they would make treaties back then. And in this covenant ceremony, this is God promising to give Abraham the land that they're now going into. And what he did to perform this ceremony, to sign this contract, was to tell Abraham, sacrifice some animals and wash them and then lay them out in two parts in a row on the ground. And so Abraham does this, and then God puts him into a deep sleep. Now, what would normally happen in this situation is both people would walk through the path between the animals, and each person would recite their end of the bargain. They would say, this is what I promise. Just like we would do in our contract. I promise to give you this money, and I promise to pay it back to you under certain terms. So when people would make a peace treaty back then, they would do this oftentimes. And the reason that they walked through these dead animals as they gave this promise is to say, if I don't fulfill my promise, then I deserve to end up like these animals. That's how serious they would take it. Now, in this scenario, only God walks through the animals. it says that a fire walked through and God recited the promise to him as the fire, which would resemble the light of God. And so God walked through the pieces of the dead animals and recited this promise. So he was promising, I will do this. I will give your family this land. I promise you that I will. And if I break my promise, I deserve to be dead, which, God cannot do. But he's trying to convey, this is a serious promise that I'm making to you. And in this specific situation, Abraham didn't have to walk through. God asked him to make no promises that were dependent on God making his promise. Because if I break my promise in the contract, then that frees the next people to break their promise. They don't have to fulfill their end of the bargain if I don't. And God didn't want Abraham to have to do that because God wanted to give the land, and he knew that people cannot fulfill a promise to him. They will break it. They will mess up. And so he said, it's not contingent upon anything that you do. I am the only one making this promise. And so that's a cool example of what it looked like when people would make a promise. And then it also shows us, as they're going into the promised land, how seriously God took his oath. So it's important for the people to take their oaths and their covenants seriously also. And then the other reason, and the biggest reason that they had to keep their oath, is because they made it in the name of the Lord. And they could not make God out to be a liar. And that's why it's best just don't swear by the name of God, right? Because we don't want to be in that type of situation. In Matthew 5:33-37, it says, "You have heard that it was said of old, you should not swear falsely, but you shall perform all of your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, don't swear at all. Neither by heaven, because it's God's throne, or by the earth, because it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you can't make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." And so our word should be enough. We shouldn't have to have God's name to add weight to our words. Because when we do that, what happens? If you ask someone to promise something and they say, "No, I'm not going to promise that," then you know they're lying, right? And then if they do promise it, you have to question everything that they said that they weren't willing to promise. Or if they didn't add that weight to it by saying, "Oh, I promise this is true." And so we don't want anyone to question our words. That's how we add weight to our name. That's how our names become important, is by being trustworthy, by people knowing we tell the truth. And so we don't want to use God's name to add weight to our words. We just want to be trustworthy and true in our own selves, where people know when Courtney says something, it's true. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to wonder, "Oh, well, she didn't promise it to me, so maybe it's not true. She didn't swear by the name of God, and so maybe it's not true." We don't want that. Proverbs 22:1 says that a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. And so we know how important a good name is. And if we want our name to mean something, then our word has to mean something. And so that was the first thing that I thought of. And then I was thinking about what it does to God's name, why they couldn't break the promise. What would it do to God's name if they were to break his promise? Leviticus 19:12 says, "You shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord your God." And so, are your words trustworthy and true? Can people trust you? Do your words carry weight? Do you follow through on your commitments? Do you do what you say you're going to do? Can people trust it? And then, do you respect the name of God? Do you realize the weight that his name carries? And do you make sure that you're not doing anything to profane his name, to taint it, to make him look bad? If we make an oath in his name and then we go back on it, then we make him to look like a liar. But I also thought about how we just bear his name. I don't have to invoke his name in an oath. I'm invoking his name by saying I'm a Christian, because that means I'm a Christ follower. People know what that means. And so if I invoke his name by saying I am a Christian, and then I don't act like a Christian, I don't follow God, I do things that are contrary to what he would want me to do, then I taint his name. Then people look at me and they say, if that's what it means to be a Christian, then I don't want any part of it. And then I have made people reject God or distance themselves from him, all because I have tainted his name. And so these are things that I was thinking about as I was reading, and how I need to be more careful, revere his name, realize how important it is to bear his name and to speak his name, and to make sure that my words and my actions line up with that just as best as I can as a human being. In Leviticus 22:31 and 32, it says, "Therefore you shall keep my commandments and perform them. I am the Lord. You shall not profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord who sanctifies you." And so by following his commandments, we uphold his name. And by not following his commandments, disobeying him, doing things our own way, we taint his name. So I was thinking about this as I was reading through this story. And then I was thinking about how important it is for us to talk to God first. Ask him before we ask other people. Ask him before we just examine all the evidence like the Israelites did and then determine things on our own. They were relying on their own logic and not on the guidance that they could get from the Lord. You know, sometimes we think that we know what's going on. It makes so much sense. And so we just make a decision right then and there. It's like, yeah, that makes total sense. Sure, let's do that. And we don't ask God. And the thing is that sometimes we're wrong. Romans 1:22 says, "Professing to be wise, they became fools." And that's very obvious in this situation. And we don't want to be that. We do not know everything, but we know the one who does. God is the only one who is omniscient, which means all-knowing. He's the only one. So we should always ask him, why don't we do this, right? Why is it that we have the smartest one at our disposal, and yet we don't ask him the questions? We just go on about our business like we know everything. Why is that? I think a lot of it is because we can see this evidence. We're looking at this bread like they did, and we can't see God. And so we forget to ask him because we forget that he's just right there beside us. He's always available for us to ask these questions to. And so we need to get in a practice of talking to him as if he's right here, because he is. In 1 Thessalonians 5:17, it tells us to pray without ceasing. And I think that's what that means, is to just talk to him all of the time. If we're talking to God all of the time and we're telling him things like, "Oh, what a beautiful sky. I love that. How pretty." Or, "God, I'm so sad today. Listen to what happened to me." Or, "This person upset me," or, "I'm worried about this." If we would do that, then maybe we would also say, "Hey God, what do I do about this?" Maybe it would come more naturally for us to ask him questions if we just talk to him about everything. Most of us pray to him, but we pray to him by asking him for things. Help me with this. Heal this person. change this circumstance. And in that way, we're talking to him more like he's a genie there to grant our wishes than our friend or our father, right? The Bible tells us that he is our heavenly Father. And Jesus tells the disciples, I no longer call you my servants, I call you my friends. It says that God spoke to Moses face to face like a friend. This is the kind of relationship that we want with God. This is what it means to have a personal relationship with him, where you talk to him about everything, just as you would someone that you have a personal relationship with on this earth, right? When your spouse who lives with you is just right there, you just tell them what you're thinking. You just say, oh, that's so pretty, or man, I'm so upset about this, or whatever. And yet we don't do this to God. Maybe because we feel like we have to be formal. We have to bow our heads and we have to say this prayer and close our eyes and ask him for these things and do it in this proper way. And there's definitely a time for that, for sure. We talked about reverencing God and honoring his name. And so there's definitely a time for that. But there's also a time for us to just talk to him. I think that's what it means to pray without ceasing. Have a continuous conversation that never ends, as if he is available to us at every single moment, because he is. And so I think this is something that we need to get in a practice of. We just need to practice talking to God about everything that comes into our minds. Good and bad, happy and sad, mad and frustrated and confused, and all of those things, right? We just need to talk to him. And then if we do that, then maybe we'll also ask him questions. One more reason that I think maybe we don't ask him questions is because we don't know how to receive answers from God. And this is hard. Maybe you do talk to him throughout the day and you tell him when you're mad and sad and you tell him about your day and you talk to him about all the things that you're seeing and hearing and feeling. Maybe you do all those things, but you don't ask him questions because you're not really sure how to receive an answer from someone that you can't see and doesn't speak to you audibly. And this is a hard thing to do. And I wish I could just give you this plan and I could say, this is how you do it. This is how you get answers from God. And I can't tell you exactly how it's going to work every time or how you're going to know that it's him. But all I can say is just start doing it. Just start talking to him about everything and start asking him questions. And then wait for his answer. Listen, watch, see what you believe he's showing to you. Sometimes, if you will just ask him a question, he'll immediately give you the answer. This happened to me just the other day. Something happened to me, and I'm saying, God, I've been trying to make this decision for months now. I've been trying to decide what to do about this, and now it's happened again, and I don't know what to do. And so would you please just tell me what to do? Am I supposed to do this or am I not? And the second that I got the last word out of my mouth, it was like, do it. Just do it, Courtney. What are you waiting for? Why have you been waiting all this time? Just do it. And I think that was God, because it was right after I asked him the question that this came into my mind. And so sometimes that's how he answers our questions. We ask him a question and immediately we just feel like this is the answer to the question. Sometimes we ask him the question and we just sit there and we begin just trying to listen, and maybe certain things begin to come to our mind and we begin to think about these things, and then we're able to say, is this you? Is this me? What's going on? And as we continue to talk, we begin to feel a certain way and we realize, yeah, I think God is leading me in this direction. Sometimes we ask him a question and then we go on about our business and we just begin to watch. We read the Bible, and as we're reading, we're like, I think that's the answer to my question. I think he's telling me the answer to my question right there. Sometimes we go to church and we hear it in Sunday school or in a sermon, and we're like, that's the answer to my question. Sometimes we're talking to a friend and they tell us something and we're like, I think God is answering my question through this person. Sometimes a door is open or closed. Sometimes things just begin leading in a certain direction and we think, I think this is where God is leading me because these things are happening. And so just pray, ask him the question, and then pay attention. And then when you think he starts to tell you something, say, God, is that you? Is that the answer to the question that I asked you? And then just continue to pay attention and do what you think God is leading you to do. If you will do this, God will answer your questions. He will show you the way. You'll be surprised if this is the first time you've ever done it, and then the first time that God answers your question and it's him, and you're like, wow, look at that. I asked him a question and he answered me and I heard him. And then there'll be times when you're doing it and you feel like God's not answering your question. You don't have any idea what to do. But don't be discouraged in those times. Just continue to ask him, continue to go in the direction that you think he's leading you. And just make sure that you don't do anything that's contrary to what his word would tell us. This is all a practice. Talking to him about everything, listening to him, all something to practice. We'll never perfect it here on this earth. But one day in heaven, we will commune with him perfectly. We'll know what he's saying and he'll know what we're saying and we'll have perfect conversation. That's not going to happen on this earth, but just begin talking, begin listening, and as you do it, it will become more natural. You will start to talk to him more and listen to him better. And that's the only advice I can give you. I hope that it's helpful. I hope that you're not like, yeah, I wanted a better formula, Courtney. I can't give you a better formula, but just to start to do it and see what happens. So I'm going to end with this verse. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Courtney. that could be right there. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will direct your paths. So acknowledge him in everything you do. Everything that's going on in your life, talk to him about it. And then he'll direct your paths. In that, it doesn't say he'll answer your question. It says he'll direct your path. That sounds pretty subtle. And so in the times whenever you're asking for an answer and you don't feel like God's giving it to you immediately, think of this verse where it's like, I'm not answering your question. I'm just directing your path. I'm steering you this direction or that. Sometimes he'll steer you in a certain direction and you'll go there. And then he'll say, okay, that's exactly where I wanted you at that moment. And now I want you to go to this other direction. I want you to go here. I want you to go there. Just listen, pay attention, and let him direct your paths. We're way better off doing that than relying on ourselves, doing what we think is the right thing to do. Actually, I'm going to read you one more verse. This is Isaiah 30, 1 through 2, and it says, woe to the rebellious children, says the Lord, who take counsel, but not of me. And they devise plans, but they're not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. These have decided to go down to Egypt, but they haven't asked my advice. So we're way better off listening to God, letting him answer our questions, letting him direct our paths, than to seek counsel from someone other than him, or just devise our own plans and hope it works out. So that's all I have for y'all today. I hope that it was encouraging. I hope that you have been encouraged to make your words matter and be truthful and trustworthy, fulfill your commitments. I hope that you have realized the importance of the name of God and what it means to carry his name, bear his name, speak his name, and that you will treat it as important and precious and do your best not to taint his name, but to live up to it. And that maybe you have been encouraged to talk more to God and to listen to him better. Next week, we will continue in Joshua, continue with their quest in the Promised Land. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that episode. Go to Live Through Jesus and read the blog post for this week, because it talks even more about talking to God and listening to him. And hopefully that will inspire you also. And then follow me on social media, and you can see verses that I've referred to throughout the week and share those with friends and family. And then if you want the written lesson, go to livethroughjesus.substack.com and you can subscribe there. And then every one of these lessons that I teach on podcast, you can get in written form and take those and study just more for yourself, look up verses and read and really ingest this. Or you can print them out and you can do them with a Bible study group. Once you subscribe, then you will not only get this lesson, but all of the lessons for Joshua. So you can print them all out and you can do a full study of Joshua with your friends. And it's only $6 a month. So you'll get 4 lessons for $6 a month. And then you can print all the back lessons for that $6. You can cancel at any time. So you can get what you want for Joshua and cancel if you want to do that. I hope that you don't, but you are free to do that. And you can print them all out for your friends, and they don't have to subscribe if they don't want to get them in their email. This would be a great way for you to study and talk about these things with other believers. So I invite you to do that. I would love your support in that if you think that's something that would benefit you. And then otherwise, just read the blog posts and listen to the episodes, and that's perfect. So talk to God and listen to him more this week, and then I'll see you back next week. Thanks, and have a good day.